All right, so you all should be able to see my screen. And once again, welcome to tonight's webinar about mobilizing Black gay men. And we're going to have some amazing presentations. So thank you so much. So firstly, I'd like to start with the mission of the Counter Narrative Project. The mission of the Counter Narrative Project is to build power among Black gay men and to work in coalition and solidarity with all movements committed to social and racial justice. You can find us online at our website. Our website is thecounternarrative.org, and you can find us on social media, and also make sure that you follow our YouTube page as well. I'm going to have another slide in a second which will tell you how to get to all of those things, but you can join our mailing list at thecounternarrative.org. So some of our key initiatives, we have our various working groups. So we have our Brother to Brother working group, Harm Reduction working group, our Black Gay Vote working group, and our Prep Collective and Arts and Culture working groups. Because all of you are here, please make sure that you're on our mailing list. On a weekly basis, we send out updated notices about which working groups are meeting that week. And you can feel free to join into any meetings that interest you. So that information is there. It comes out on a weekly basis. And I'm going to talk about our next working group meeting in a moment. So ways to stay engaged with the Counter Narrative Project. You can stay engaged with us by subscribing to our YouTube channel. And you can join us on a weekly basis for Revolutionary Health. Revolutionary Health is our weekly YouTube series, and you can subscribe and get notices as to when we go live. You can follow us on social media, on Twitter at Building Desire, on Facebook at The Counter Narrative Project, and on Instagram at The Counter Narrative. And as I mentioned earlier, you can join our mailing list at thecounternarrative.org. So as far as our upcoming events, before we jump into our presentation, tomorrow, if you're in the Atlanta area, we will be celebrating the life of Essex Hemphill. Tomorrow is Essex Hemphill's birthday, and we are going to be having an event at the Auburn Avenue Research Library, Dear Essex, celebrating the life and legacy of Essex Hemphill. So if you are in Atlanta, be sure to join us tomorrow evening. On Wednesday in Atlanta as well, we're going to be having a very important conversation, what participatory budgeting would mean for Atlanta. So we want to begin exploring this conversation with City Councilman Amir Farouki about what that would mean if there was some sort of participatory budgeting process. So if you're in Atlanta, join us at the Philip Rest Center on Wednesday. Also on Wednesday, we are going to be rebroadcasting an episode of Revolutionary Health featuring Billy Porter. Billy Porter came to Revolutionary Health last year and discussed his Out.com op-ed about childhood sexual abuse. We are going to be rebroadcasting that on Facebook and YouTube tomorrow. So make sure that you, on Wednesday, we'll be broadcasting that. So if you're not in Atlanta and at our participatory budgeting event, you can still stay engaged with the Counter Narrative Project on Revolutionary Health. And finally, next week, so our Arts and Culture Working Group meets next week. We're going to be having a conversation. We're actually going to be having a twofer conversation. So we're certainly going to talk about what Beyonce and Jay-Z's GLAD speech means for our community. We discussed a bit of that on a Revolutionary Health episode about music. We're going to dive in a little deeper on our Arts and Culture call. We're also going to be talking about Nipsey Hussle on this particular call as well. So if you join us for the Arts and Culture Working Group next week, you can learn more about or be part of the conversation as far as our Arts and Culture Working Group. So we're looking forward to seeing you then. So we are going to go ahead and jump into our presentation. So I have a quick question. Let me see here. So Monty, can you hear me? Can you unmute yourself? And it's *6. Okay, I saw you.
Okay, Johnny, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. So,
okay, it's just I'm sorry, it's weird because I have the video going, but I also had to dial in order to for you to be able to hear me. That's why I had this confused look on my face. Like I used to be able to do it all at once in the video chat, but it won't let me. So
no problem. So what I'm going to do is welcome Monte Wolfe. Monte, what I will do for you is I'm going to actually go ahead and share your presentation. So give me one moment. And then what will happen is as you go through your presentation and you want to move to the next slide, just give me a note to move to that slide and I will do that. So let me go ahead and share my screen, which you should be able to see now. And I'm going to turn it over to you. So Monte Wolfe is going to talk to us a bit about Brave Soul Collective and Brave Soul Sundays. Monte, take it away. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Johnny, and good evening, everybody. So yeah, I'm still just trying to figure out how to move this and do all the other jazz. I guess last week or the week before last, Johnny asked me to be prepared today to present and talk about Brave Soul Sundays and how those discussion gatherings were born and how we go about doing them and why and all that other kind of stuff. So what you'll see in this Google slide document that Johnny has up on the screen is what I came up with in maybe about 6 or 7 slides or whatnot. So I guess if we can just go to the second one listed as origins, that's where we'll start. Thank you, Johnny. As is stated here, Brave Soul Sunday, and originally it was Brave Soul Saturday or Sunday because when we first started doing them in 2006, the very first one was held on a Saturday. It was the Saturday of Black Pride weekend that year because that was when we officially launched everything to the public. When we started Brave Soul Collective that year, the whole idea for it all came in February of 2006. But between February and May of that year, it was just a lot of planning and preparation between myself and Eric Chambers and Tim and West as we kind of prepared to go public with everything and have our first event, which was held on Saturday, May 27th in 2006. And that was intentional because we wanted it to kick off during DC Black Pride weekend, which is always observed here in DC over Memorial Day weekend. So, yeah, that first event was it was a bit experimental. I think I kind of knew what I wanted it to be, and after talking it over with Eric and Tim M, they were both on board. But even with that first one, I can remember just being very, very nervous about launching some of the stuff that we were doing because I wanted it to be something, where people felt at home and people felt welcome. But it was just a lot of anxiety that day. I remember that specifically. And thanks to one of my spiritual advisors who was there, she kind of talked me off the ledge and just reminded me that what I was doing was important. And we kicked it off and it went really well. As I listed in the slide, that first event that we did on May 27th was by invitation only. We, over the course of maybe about 2 months prior to that, me and Tim and Eric crafted a very careful list of people that we wanted to be in the room, or who we would have loved to have been in the room, because they either lived in the DC area or we knew that they were already going to be in DC for DC Black Pride weekend that year. So by the time we got started that afternoon, I would say there was we probably invited about 40 brothers, and there was at least about 30 brothers who showed up. And it was a pretty powerful event. I can remember me and Eric and Tim M going around with 3 of us and just kind of setting the tone after we did a bit of a circle and welcoming everybody and just sharing a brief bit about our stories. And what I remember about that most, and this is something that has carried along through all of the Brave Soul stuff that we've done in terms of these discussion gatherings over the course of the last 13 years, is that when we set the tone and we just kind of put the energy of and the element of truth and being honest in the room, it just kind of changed the game. And it was something where everybody felt completely comfortable to be honest and to just share whatever their truth was in that particular moment. And it was all, done in a safe and welcoming and inviting space. So that was how that whole thing went. And as I said in the last little paragraph of this page, the success of that first event was a sign of good things to come. For Brave Soul Collective aim to create innovative, interactive, and safe space for Black, gay men, and LGBTQ people of color to gather and share and learn and communicate with one another. So we can move to the next slide, please. Okay, thank you, Johnny. And I'm sorry, I'm following along on my computer as well. So, it was really the why. I just called this section fulfilling a need, and I feel like this was where I wanted to talk about why we felt this was such an important piece of what it was that we were doing at that time. When, as I stated, when the whole idea for Brave Soul Collective in itself came to me, I was at a spiritual gathering, which I'll get back to in a moment, because the structure of how we conduct Brave Soul Sunday and Brave Soul Saturday events was born out of what I experienced that first Sunday, which was the spiritual gathering I was at in February of 2006, when it was laid on my heart during meditation that I needed to start what became Brave Soul Collective, even though I had no earthly idea what it was in that moment. But once, maybe about 2 or 3 months, a couple of months after this whole idea came to me, I really just had to sit down with a piece of paper and kind of flesh out why there was a need for any of the stuff that we decided to come up with, but especially with regard to the discussion gathering piece. I felt like it was born out of a desire by myself and Eric and Tim, after a lot of conversation, and that's just really putting our heads together to talk about us needing to have an outlet for Black gay men to talk about things that were pertinent and important to us specifically. Around that time, I think, there was still a lot of, this was before Facebook and, a lot of social media stuff. I mean, it was still just very fragmented in terms of social media and online presence and all those other kinds of things. But we just felt like we wanted something, a space where, in front of one another, where we as Black gay men could gather and talk about, whether it was about dating, whether it was about sex or about family or, relationships or homophobia or racism or any of those kinds of things. So it was really about us wanting to create something that, where we could connect with one another. It was also about us making sure that we had a sense of community. And this is something I don't know about other areas in the country in terms of Black gay presence or whatnot, but DC is, for as long as I've lived here, over about 23 years, it has always been very fragmented in terms of just groups and all those other kinds of things. I mean, there are a lot of amazing brothers doing a lot of amazing things, but a lot of times it just seems like a lot of stuff is very fragmented. It's like, either people are just in little cliques or little pods in terms of people that they know already or what have you. And part of my interest was wanting to kind of break down that wall, so that, whether you were a part of a leather community or a bear community or, the house ball community or whatever, I wanted somewhere where Black gay men from all different walks of life could sit in a room together and talk about the things that we did have in common, or, even be able to talk respectfully in a way where it honored all of us about the things that separated us or what have you. So it was out of a need to create community. The other piece of it for us has always been about safety, and us just making sure that we are safe emotionally and intellectually in terms of being able to share what it is that we feel, and knowing that, it's confidential and that it stays, what's said in the room stays in the room, and just knowing that people would be open-minded enough to be able to hear other people's opinions or other people's viewpoints or whatnot, and be able to, maybe think about things from a different perspective than the one that they walked in with or what have you. It was about comfort, because I wanted us to be able to all feel comfortable, which kind of ties into safety. It was really just about us making sure that we felt that everyone there felt welcome and everybody felt like, they belonged in the space. And that probably was born out of some of my own stuff, just in terms of just feeling like I don't really fit in a lot of places or in a lot of spaces, which either means that I, a lot of times, either just create my own, or I just kind of go off and do my own thing. So for me, it was about, as much as I felt like I didn't fit in, I wanted to create a space where I fit, but I also made it open enough so that whoever walked in the room, Black gay men, or LGBTQ people, felt like they were welcome and that they weren't being scrutinized or put under a microscope in terms of, well, do you have this, or do you wear this, or do you look this size, or what have you. And lastly, the piece about recreation was really just about me personally wanting to create something that wasn't about going out to a club or, being out in a bar or something like that. I mean, I know that clubs and bars are, place where we congregate and where we, kind of, I guess, as some would say, kind of have church and just get together. But for me, it's something, I mean, I've gone to clubs and I've been out or whatnot, but I don't feel comfortable in those spaces. I don't feel like I can be myself or relax or let loose. So I wanted to make sure that I created something and that we had something that was an alternative to that. I mean, not saying that it was going to be just something everybody was going to just abandon clubs and nightclubs or bars for, but I wanted to make sure that people had options so that we felt like we could go somewhere else and congregate and talk with other people somewhere other than like a club or a bar or even like a house party, to just be able to talk about things that felt important to them. So that's a large part of, that's pretty much in a nutshell why we felt like we needed to start this whole thing. I guess next slide. The structure. The structure for the Brave Soul gatherings has pretty much, it's taken shape and form and changed a little bit over the course of the years, but from day one, it's always been something that was intentional, and that we wanted the events to feel relaxed and informal and free flowing. We always put the chairs in a circle. And that was intentional because we wanted everybody in the room to be able to see one another. We didn't want something where the chairs were in a row like a performance where, you know, there was this bit of a disconnect between the people, because as opposed to it being about as opposed to a performance and the focus all being on the stage and with whatever is going on, this was really about everybody in the room being able to see and witness whatever person kind of had the floor and was talking, versus, you know, being able to witness somebody else's reaction to them or what have you, just to be able to kind of take everyone in. The usual structure of the event is that I try to block off a 3-hour time block. And the first 30 to 45 minutes is usually just used for socializing and just letting people kind of come into the space and walk out of whatever it is that they came from, whether it was from work or, you know, if it had been raining or if the weather was nasty or what have you, just allowing people time to find the space where we were doing the event. I always had music playing by the time we get ready to open the doors to the public. And a large part of this for me, as I mentioned earlier, because this whole thing was born out of my experiences with First Sunday, which is a spiritual gathering that I have attended since 2000. I felt I borrowed a lot of what we do with Brave Soul Sundays in terms of structure from First Sunday. I always made sure that we have an altar, and if you look at some of the, like the slide on the very first page and a couple of the other things that we'll get to, I took some pictures. I have some pictures that we shared from different altars at different events, but I always take the altar, dress it up with things that are, you know, important to me, and, you know, other things that, you know, some things were given to us as gifts for Brave Soul Collective, and all of these are things that I wanted to make sure that we put on the table just to cause some positive energy and some healing into the space. I always try to, you know, burn incense and lavender just because those are things that just kind of calm me and kind of chill me out. And what I've noticed about that was, aside from it helping me with what was probably a hectic day to get everything together, normally by the time everybody would come up the stairs or walk into the room, it was like the minute they hit the door, they would smell the incense, or they, you know, people would just kind of stop and they just take a deep breath, and it would just cause them to just kind of shift. And it would just kind of change their energy, you know, as they came into the room, so that they felt more at home and more welcome and more at peace. So that's always been a pointed thing that we do, just to kind of shift the energy and to let people know and to demonstrate to them that you're in a different space and that it's something that is open and, you know, just very loose and free. After the socializing part of the events, I'd normally just do some opening remarks to just kind of welcome people. 95% of the time, I've been the one to facilitate some of the events, to facilitate these events. When Tim was in DC, or when we did events together, we would kind of co-facilitate, or he would take the lead, and then I would, you know, we would just kind of switch off, whatever. We would kind of share, we would co-present. But 95% of the time, I'm the one doing the facilitation, and, you know, just trying to make sure that we are welcoming people and inviting them into the space to be able to, you know, have a new experience if it's their first time, and to welcome them back to be open and be ready to discuss and share to the degree that they see fit or feel comfortable with, if they had been there before. And the last part of the opening is a bit of a centering. And again, I took this from First Sunday. I would just ask everybody to just stand up, hold hands, and we just do a quick circle. And I just ask everybody to just call some energy into the circle. We just take a few deep breaths. And, you know, as to make sure that everybody was comfortable, or is comfortable, I just ask for people to call on the God of their understanding, whatever that looks like, feels like, and represents for them. I'm not a religious person. I'm definitely a spiritual individual, but I want to make sure that everybody feels welcome and feels honored and welcome in the space. So the centering is really just to kind of get us to just kind of, again, shift the energy and be ready to just be open as possible, mentally and emotionally, to just have that experience and to bond with one another. Outside of that, we just go around and ask people to just do very brief introductions, and it doesn't have to be anything super involved, but just, to say who they are, how they heard about it, if it's their first time, and, what they hope to gain, or if it's more, if it wasn't their first time, what brought them back or why they felt like they wanted to come back. So those are the things that usually make up the structure of the event. And as usual, as is always the case and has been the case for the last 13 years, discussions are always really, really slow to start. I've found that for whatever reason, when we do Q&As after a show, it's the same thing. It's like it gets very, very difficult to get people to open up. But once you get people to kind of open up, the floodgates just open, and then it's just kind of like, before you know it, everybody has a hand up, everybody wants to say something. So over the years, I've kind of gotten used to that and come to expect that, because it always happens so much that, in fact, by the time it's over, I have to kind of whittle things down and just kind of bring it to a close, and just encourage people to just kind of save some of those things for online discussions, or, to kind of table them for the next time we have an event. Next slide, please. Topics. This part, I'll just kind of breeze through. As I put in the presentation on this page, the finger on the pulse approach is what we've always used. I normally just try to make sure that whatever it is that we're discussing at a Brave Soul gathering is topical, that is something that is timely, that is going on, and that is relevant, not to just me, but to people in the community or things that might be happening. So if there's something that's going on in terms of current events, even though me personally, I'm not a current events person to just kind of sit up and talk about current events with somebody in a small talk setting, because that really just kind of makes me sick to my stomach, because it reeks of being disingenuous. But for me, in that kind of setting like this, if there's something that everybody's been talking about, or something that's on the hearts and minds of a lot of people, I kind of like to give that room to breathe, and just let that, I'll just kind of throw it out there, and then just let people say what they feel like they need to say to just kind of get it off their chest. And then I also what I also find is that would just kind of segue and allow the conversation to take shape and form, and kind of venture off into something else. But outside of the finger on the pulse approach, the selection of discussion topics for Brave Soul Sundays is and has always been calculated. We, back in the day when we first started all of this, when we had a lot more of a website presence, which I'm in the process of trying to work with Johnny on, in terms of getting the website revamped and getting a makeover and all those other kinds of things, so I can go back to doing the monthly discussion topics and all those other kinds of things. But early on, when the website was a lot more active than it is now, before social media kind of took off, we would have like a monthly discussion topic. So I would try to align the monthly discussion topic with whatever, with our discussion gathering. So that would be one of those things that we would talk about. So if we were talking about politics that month on the website, and I wrote something, or Timon wrote something, or Eric wrote something, or one of our featured artists or something wrote something around politics, we would kind of use that as a springboard to kind of throw out into the space and to get the conversation going. Outside of that, after, the website whole thing kind of shifted, again, I just tried to make it very intentional in terms of thinking about whatever things might be going on, or, some of the topics have been very, what's the word I'm looking for, touchy or controversial. We've talked about racism. We've talked about sexuality. One of the ones that I remember was the most uncomfortable for me as a facilitator was the discussion around having unprotected sex versus, protection or what have you. And it was really because there were a lot of people who were on the side of just feeling like, if you engaged in unprotected sex, and this was in 2007. I remember this was in the first year of the time that we did all of this. People, there were some people that were in the room that were just being very judgmental, and just kind of, just kind of saying, well, if you engage in this and you do this knowingly, then you deserve what you get, and da 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 da. And I just made it a point to make sure that everybody understood that, all opinions, all viewpoints were welcome, and that, this wasn't a space where we were going to shame anybody or look down on anybody or try to, as they call it, yuck someone else's yum. But it was a turning point for me, because I found that I had to be a little bit more intentional and a little bit more pointed about making sure that I kept those ground rules and those parameters in place to let people know what was acceptable in the space and what wasn't. And it wasn't something where, I or anybody else had to get ugly. It was just a situation where I just had to kind of be insistent that people give other people the consideration and the respect that they would ask for themselves. But it was just very interesting to have that conversation happen the way that it did. So those topics are always, hot button topics and issues. And it's usually a lot of good things that come out of whatever it is that we wind up talking about on any given month. Next slide. Outcomes. So over the course of the last 13 years or so, there have been benefits of hosting Brave Soul discussion events, which have been vast. Personal benefits for those of us involved as activists and artists. I'll speak from my perspective, and I know in years past, Tim and I would talk about this, that a lot of times whatever might have been going on in our personal lives, if we had a lot that we were juggling or a lot that we were challenged with, it was something where we felt like it was all worth it by the time it was over, because there were so many people that showed up and there were so many people that spoke about how they felt like there was a need for what it is that we were doing. And it just kind of, if there were other challenges that were associated with producing the events or making them happen, or just in our personal lives as being artists and activists, and just how busy and challenging that could get, it was always a payoff with doing the events, because this work just kind of let us know that we were on target and that we were doing something that was very powerful. Participant benefits versus, today, 2006 versus today, have taken shape and form over the years. I've gotten a lot of people who reach out to me after an event, right after we're breaking down, or sometimes they'll wait until, the next day, or email me or call me or reach out to me on Facebook or other social media platforms in a private message and say, well, hey, I really enjoyed this. I'm looking forward to the next one. I've been looking for something like this, but I didn't know what I was walking into, but I got something from this that was more than anything I could have ever expected. So I think, with most people who have come to our events of this nature, just like with our performances, they wind up leaving differently than they came, and that's always a blessing if they feel like they got something out of being in the room with 2 or 3, with 10 to 20 other people that they didn't know, some people that they might know, but just being in a room with other people and being able to see the things that we had in common and the things that separate us, but that just really bond us or whatnot. There have been community benefits. This Brave Soul discussion gatherings and events have always been an opportunity for other people in the community to be able to showcase what they're doing. So I try to, because of the whole thing that I talked about earlier about how fragmented DC is, if there are other people who are doing things that I knew about, and if they were available or they wanted to come and speak about it, if they wanted to be in the room, or if they had flyers or something about their event, I always make sure I have a table or something so that people can post about their stuff and, talk about what it is that they're doing, and, just trying to mobilize people. We've created partnerships with other organizations like Us Helping Us, where I used to work, and now Whitman Walker and Counter Narrative Project, obviously, a lot of other organizations that we've partnered with and partnered with for discussions, for panels, for all different kinds of things that have had long-lasting benefits. So also there have been artist showcases. Some events we've done have been kind of twofold, where we did part discussion and then we kind of switched gears and then maybe had like a brief presentation from a specific artist that might be a candle maker or an author or someone else who wanted to talk about something that they had coming up, or, what have you. And then sometimes me and some of the other people from the Brave Soul troupe would come and perform some work. I remember we did an event right after that last election, where it was called Now What? And we really just kind of needed to talk about things that were really politically charged and, what this meant with Obama being out of office and that other said person being voted into office, and what that was going to look like. So that was a very charged gathering. And if you go back, Johnny, you don't have to go back to this, but for anybody that's following along, if you look at that slide that's the photo that's in slide number 3, the one that's entitled Fulfilling a Need, that picture is from that event that we had right after the election. So that was how many people we had in the room. It was a huge, huge space, but we had to open up the circle like way more. And as you see, I had to take the altar out of the middle because we were trying to make space for everything. But that was a huge, that one, thank you. That was a huge, it was on a Sunday afternoon, and we did part discussion. This part was the second part because we kind of did the performance stuff first to give people something to chew on. And then we went into the discussion to talk about a lot of stuff that we shared. But it was very, very powerful. And those have been great things that have come out of the event. And lastly, I'll just say a positive outcome has always been that if we have other things going on, like a performance or something that we're doing where we partner with Counter Narrative Project or something else, we always try to make sure that we are passing out flyers or encouraging people to come to some of our other events so they get a chance to see some of the community outreach and the discussion things in terms of mobilization efforts in that way. But we are an artist-based organization. So the way that we, worship and get out there and do our thing primarily is by getting on that stage and laying it all out there. So it's always been a great opportunity to be able to promote our own events and just encourage people to come out or even just show teasers or, clips from something after an event has happened if we have the event after a performance event has happened. So those have been some of the outcomes. Next slide, please. And we got a couple more, and I think we're almost at the end. Outcomes. So challenges. Yes, challenges and triumphs. So some of the challenges have just been over the course of the years finding space availability. We've done Brave Soul gatherings in probably about 4 or 5 different places in the DC area. The very first ones were at Warehouse Theater, which is no more. It was bought out and torn down years ago when a lot of the gentrification stuff started happening right down there, Gallery Place. But that was my favorite place to host these events because we did a lot of performances in the actual theater, but they had like an art space upstairs, which was like a couple of big rooms. And that was where we would host the events. And that photo of the altar that's on this page is actually from I think one of the few times where we actually had the Brave Soul Sunday gathering in the actual theater. It was on a Sunday, and this was probably within a month at the time when Whitney Houston died. I remember that specific altar because I dressed the table with purple cloth, as you can see, because I know purple was one of her favorite colors. And, that particular event was really just about honoring Whitney Houston and everybody kind of trying to talk about their feelings around her death and, what that meant for a lot of us who grew up listening to her music and all those other kinds of things. So, like I said, some of the challenges have been space availability. That was one of the last ones we did at Warehouse Theater. But we always find the space. Sometimes the space has been free. We've done a lot of stuff at ECAC, which is the Emergence Community Arts Collective right across the street from Howard University. That's where those other pictures were taken. But we always find the space. We, figure it out somehow. Some of the other challenges have been around just scheduling and calendars. Again, I try to make sure that I host these events on weekends when there's not a whole lot of other stuff going on during that time that we may have to compete with. Like a lot of times now, since we do them on Sundays, like in February, if I know the Oscars are happening or there's, the Grammys or something else, I definitely don't do an event on those days because I know sometimes people have parties or other stuff that they're looking to do. So I try to make sure that I look at the calendar a month or two ahead and see what other kinds of things generally might be going on and other things that might be happening in the DC community that we may have to compete with or that we might lose people to. So those have just been some of the challenges. Funding and resources have always been a challenge, as usual, for a small arts organization that is, being funded out of, my pocket and, with support from organizations like the Counter Narrative and some of our other partners. But again, luckily, the spaces that I'm always able to make sure that it's something affordable for me to be able to pay for. And sometimes we've gotten food donated by other organizations like Whitman Walker, who for our first one of this year in January, they bought all the food and, took care of all of that stuff for me, which was a huge support. But those have just always been some of the challenges in terms of funding and finding resources. But, I open up my mouth and ask questions and, ask for help. And it's always come when I've needed it. And, we get it done some way or another. Support and assistance on weekends/days of events. I just threw that in there because that's been a personal challenge because if I have a lot going on in terms of trying to get ready for the event or all those other kinds of things where I'm ripping and running and I'm trying to promote and do all this other kind of stuff, sometimes it's been one of those things where the people in my tribe, the people closest to me, I have to call on them to just maybe help me run around or help me set up or do some other things because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work for one person to do. Like I said, it was a little bit easier when Timon was in the area or when Eric was here, but, with the absence of them, other people like Alan Sharp and Donald Birch and all these other people that are core people with Brave Soul Collective always show up and help me make sure that we get everything that we need to get done and that we get it all set up. So I'm very grateful for those people in my tribe that support me on the weekends and on the days of these events. And the last challenge I would say has just been in terms of planning and attendance. It's always one of those kind of things with the planning part of this where like I never know how much food to get or I never know how much, how many snacks to have or whatever because, these events are always free and open to the public. But sometimes, like I want to make sure I have enough food, but I also don't want to get so much food that, if we planned for 30 people and 10 show up, then I have all this other stuff that I have to get rid of or take home. But I always make sure I have plates and foil and all this other kind of stuff, and I welcome people to take as much stuff with them as they want. And the attendance piece is just, again, when people RSVP for things, a lot of times, and it's free, sometimes people will RSVP 2 or 3 weeks before and they'll forget, even if they get a reminder, or, if they didn't really pay for the tickets. Plans change. I get it. Sometimes those kinds of things happen. And, that's about it. So triumphs have been that we've grown over the years. There have been a lot of epiphanies and healing that have happened over the course of the years with people who come to the events. And, they have said that they've gotten something from this and that they definitely want it to continue. And the bonding piece has just been something great. I've heard of people who met at some of our events and started dating, or, just had friendships, or, people that they might have known in passing, but they met and talked more and learned more about one another at the events. And lastly, I'll say that there have been networking opportunities for people to get jobs and, to get auditions, or, to get work as an artist, which has also been a cornerstone of what we do with Brave Soul Collective, is to just make sure that we are creating a network for one another. So that's been a great thing as well. And the last slide, looking ahead, the photo you see in this one was from the last one that we did in January of this year, which was the first one of this year. Which is called Race, Sex, and Power. It's just this ever-increasing need for community discussion, which was evidenced by that one that we did, where we talked about the Ed Buck case and the deaths of Jamel Moore and Timothy Dean. And for me, it's about flexibility and growth and just allowing this to take shape and form the way that it needs to. It's about consistency and trying to do it as often as possible, to the degree and to the extent that I can do this with regard to resources. And just about activism efforts to make sure that we are addressing the things that are most important to us as Black, gay, LGBTQ people, to make sure that we have a platform to be able to discuss what matters to us. So that's about where it is and how this whole thing is taking shape and form. So, yes.
Monte, that was absolutely amazing. And so for those that are joining, we will have some Q&A. We will have some time for Q&A at the end. So please make sure that you can certainly ask questions in the chat box, but we're going to have some time for some Q&A. And so thank you so much for that, Monte. And I feel like we're going to see some overlap. So Michael, I'm going to bring you into the dialogue. And just like with Monte, if you let me know to move forward, there's a bit of a delay when that happens. But I'm going to turn it over to you. Let me share my screen. And it's all yours. Thank you, Michael.
Hi, can everyone hear me clearly?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. So before I get started, just in the interest of time, Johnny, are these slides going to be made available to the participants on this call?
Yeah, yes. So we will have this recording, and we will make sure that the slides are available to them as well.
Okay, so I won't need to go into too much depth into all of them because I'm just paying attention to how much time we have left. And I actually like mine to be a little bit more interactive. So slide, Johnny. So this is an image of Black Bear Brotherhood, at the time sponsored by Counter Narrative Project, while we're engaged in Get Out the Vote work. Those are two of my officers along with us. As you can see, there's some flyers we have there around alerting people to the registration issue. Here in Michigan, we were having voters being purged from the rolls. And so part of our work that day was to make sure, and that's actually at Hotter Than July, the Black Gay Pride here in Michigan, and making sure that the people on that day were aware of whether or not they were registered. We did more registration checks and found a lot of people who had been purged than we did new registrations. And some of that is just a result of the fact that Michigan is a motor voter state. So every time people go and get their license done, registration is part of that process for voters. Slide. So why is building and mobilizing an in-person community necessary? I want to actually ask people to take off their phones off of mute and participate a little bit in this thought. So we have now social media, we have apps, we have all of these ways in which, people are allowed to no longer be isolated in theory. So why, and there's like Facebook groups that are devoted to, if you're a gamer, if you're an anime person, if you're a bear, if you're into kink, like there's a space for you and a tribe for you that you can find online. So why is it necessary in 2019 for us to still do in-person community mobilization and community building? What are some thoughts on that?
And to participate in the conversation, please do. You need to hit *6 if you are using the phone. If you're on the app, just hit the little unmute button, and you can reply to Michael's question.
Yeah, just some quick thoughts. What comes to mind? Anybody? Are y'all still there? Y'all just got y'all avatars.
This is Eric in Arkansas.
Hey, Eric.
So it's just, like you said, we have so many online spaces here in Arkansas. It's just really important that we begin seeing each other physically, being able to touch each other, just to hug in our community. We found that this isolation is growing in our community here. And so we're trying to figure out how we're going to come back together in person, because that's the important part.
Okay. Thank you for sharing, Eric. Anyone else want to share? Okay, I'm going to take that as a no and move on slide. So part of what we learned, Black Bear Brotherhood is a Black gay male, actually Black gay, bisexual, same gender loving, and gender non-conforming for men of size space, and their allies and their admirers. So we center Black brothers of size and those who love them and appreciate them. And part of why we did that is indirectly part of what you described in Arkansas. We did a survey after our first year of operations. We'll be celebrating our second year this May, and asked brothers what did they get out of the first year of participating in our monthly potlucks and our quarterly events, our get out the vote work, and why did they need this? Like, why did they keep coming month after month? What were they getting out of it? And what we found is that through the survey work and through the discussions is that people, particularly of a certain age, missed out on organic community development. So I'm 44, and I've been out since I was 16 in 1991. And when I came out, because this is all before apps, even before AOL, one had to go to a club or a bar or a park or public sex environment or some other space where Black gay men congregated. And from those experiences, those very personal in-person experiences, some of them intimate, some of them not, you develop community and you develop friendships, and oftentimes you actually challenge your prejudices. So maybe you came to a club with some preconceived notions about who trans people were, who lesbian people were, but because you were forced to be in the same space with them, to party, to experience the scene together, those things got broken down. And similarly, like maybe you were super antagonistic towards femme guys, and your experience in that space forced you to engage and experience them as human beings as opposed to stereotype. And so there's a generation of brothers who never got to experience that, never got to go from a club to breakfast to somebody's house to hanging out with them all day the next day in crew, which was very normative for the generation that came before. And so that isolation that we assume technology had relieved them of actually did not relieve them of that. Some of the brothers came out and then they found that because of their size or because of their interests, maybe they weren't into campy things. Maybe they weren't into musicals. Maybe they were sports oriented. Maybe they were a geek. Maybe they were a man of size. And so they didn't necessarily fit in after they came out. So they kind of came out with this kind of utopian vision of what it was going to be like, and then was disappointed when it wasn't like that and went back into isolation or stop hanging around the community. A lot of them referenced bad experiences with the community, and those bad experiences oftentimes led people to experience further isolation, depression, anxiety, or amplified depression and anxiety that was already there. They did a lot of distancing, like, as if they were talking about the gay community as something other than themselves, right? Like something that was those girls, those children, those were those people. And that kind of distancing speaks to an internalized homophobia, right? Like, I'm not of that. I'm not of those people. And that also kind of was rooted in people having had one or two or even several bad experiences and, with the gay community, and this kind of broad brush assumed that everybody in the community was a certain way. Again, feeding into negative assumptions. We also found that a lot of the brothers, particularly the younger brothers, were very open about having social anxiety about in-person situations. If they were conditioned or socialized online, they didn't necessarily know how to make friends in an in-person situation, did not necessarily know how to build or find their tribe and connect to people in in-person situations, didn't know how to make friends outside of like hooking up. And so that, and which leads to the next one, which is that a lot of the spaces that were accessible and available to them seemed to center around sex or drugs or both. And so spaces for fellowship that did not center sex or drugs were scarce to them, or they didn't know where to find them or how to access them, even if they were to find them. And that they were tired of being viewed, when they were engaged, when they were acknowledged as a member of the community, it was almost universally, by agencies or outreach workers or campaigns that viewed them exclusively through the lens of HIV. And so how to view themselves and how to be considered more than a disease, particularly if they themselves were not experiencing HIV as a personal affliction. So, those were things that we learned in our survey work. Slide. So given that, for those who are interested in talking, how would you respond? Like how would you have responded to those kinds of anxieties and experiences that people have had and, people come into your space with? Any thoughts or suggestions or practices that you're doing where you are?
This is Johnny, and I know that for me, it's really a combination of what both you and Monty have done, and it's really, for me, part of my healing has been creating my own spaces. Now, but getting to the other side of that is that there comes those points where I don't always feel like my needs are being met, and so I have to reevaluate why I'm doing it. But I would say my first response would be create my own space. Now I would go a step further and say find spaces, create my own space, but make sure that whatever space it is fills me too, in the way that I need filled. Yeah.
Beautiful. I like that. Anyone else want to weigh in before we go to the next slide? Okay, slide, Johnny. So how we chose to respond to their experience, and these are just some pointers for if you decide to build something. So, Black Bear Brotherhood is a space that we built in response to some of those needs. I have to be very candid and say that I actually don't fit the bill for most of the responses that people had about why they felt like this was necessary. I've been popular since I was 16 years old. I have been somebody who's been able to transition very fluidly from the ball scene to the community activist scene to the muscle club kid scene to the bear scene as I grew in size and in age. um, and um, and so I have a very different take. And I think part of, for me as the founder of BBB, was being alarmed at the level of support that people were not having for themselves, because I've always had a very solid support network within the Black gay community, from both men and women, and would not have had the career I've had without it, quite frankly. And so, so was afraid when I heard these things. Like, I was alarmed and wanted to make sure that I was providing opportunity for other people to have something closer to akin to a support base, and give them some tools within that base. And so part of it was also for me, even though my experience wasn't their experience, was to honor their experience, to not try to refute it or explain it away or justify their experience with something different than what they remember it. You know, because a lot of times we want to say, well, what about you? What about you? How did you contribute to that? Right? Like, we want to immediately kind of refute that. And that doesn't mean that those things aren't valid, but regardless of how you have experienced community, these people have experienced in a way that has left them wounded and hurt. And so the space is to figure out how you can affirm them, right where they are, even if that affirmation is initially resisted. So for instance, at Black Bear Brotherhood, at our monthly potluck, we celebrate all of the birthdays that have happened in between the potlucks. So if our potluck takes place April 15th, and the May 15th is the next potluck, anybody who had a birthday in between that time gets a birthday card, and we try to make sure we have enough cakes. You know, sometimes it's 2, sometimes it's 3, depending on how many people had a birthday. And we'll ask people, you know, what kind of cakes they want so that we can honor their day. I can't tell you how many people were resistant to that idea, to not celebrate themselves, to not be considered special, even for the day that they were born, was a challenge for some brothers. But, you know, we're like, we hear you, we still gonna do it. We're gonna love on you anyway. Right? If nobody else in your world is making it special, we're gonna make it special. And so also it's about modeling a healthy way of relating. So, you know, how are you as the person who's facilitating the space or creating the space, and the people around you who are helping you, are y'all being kind and loving and respectful with each other? Are y'all showing empathy and compassion towards each other? Are you making sure that you're worthy of the trust that you're implicitly asking people to invite themselves to be part of, right? And be present for and don't squelch vulnerability. So one of the things that's different from Monte's group, we pass around a hat, and it's something we've evolved into. We pass around a hat and give out index cards and pens, and we ask people to put into the hat whatever they want to talk about. It could be any topic, any question. Nothing is too silly. I mean, we have talked about everything from Scooby-Doo and anime to, to, you know, the presidential election, to eating disorders. You know, there's been nothing within a range that people haven't talked about. And, you know, and sometimes there's some people who come to the space looking just to have fun, right? They don't want to get too serious. And so when we had a breakthrough with a brother who's normally not vulnerable, be vulnerable, you know, one of the brothers like, we're kind of getting heavy, aren't we? And I immediately, lovingly was like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to allow this brother to share, this brother who never shares, right? This brother who never is vulnerable with his brothers. We're going to make sure we provide space for that. So it's also making sure that you're being protective of other people's vulnerabilities as well. Honoring and celebrating them and their successes, offering fellowship, but be consistent, because a lot of what brothers have experienced, either be it from fathers or men and they've been in relationships with or whatever, or just the apps, right, is ghosting culture, right? Like, we have a serious ghosting issue that throughout our community, regardless of what walk of life you're in. And so how do you make sure you're not contributing to ghosting culture? Be real. That's not meaning don't force it. You know, don't try to be friends with people that you know you don't have anything in common with. You know, you could be respectful and affirming, and not try to be their bestie overnight, but also be open to meeting brothers where they are. Slide, please. So, again, all this is about the environment. And some of what we did do fairly early on is we asked people to define what the principles of BBB should be. And I helped to had a very strong hand in writing those principles, and made sure that they were principles that people felt like they could get behind. And part of what that did was create a space for accountability. It's a lot harder for you to tell people that they're not being in order if you haven't created a foundation to have that conversation with them, and so creating principles, establishing them up front and saying, this is what you're committing to when you commit to being a part of this space, when you commit to being part of this brotherhood, is what helps create an opportunity to say, brother, do you feel like you're living up to the principles right now that you've committed to? Right, which is a different conversation than, bitch, what are you doing? And so, and also making sure that throughout, one thing I was really clear as somebody who's founded other things. So I'm a founder of a youth center. I'm a co-founder of a Black gay film festival in Chicago. One thing I've learned about the cult of the charismatic leader is that if you make it about you, if you make it about your personality and your charisma and your skills, then it won't last. It certainly won't outlast you. And so always using the R language, always asking brothers throughout the process, even when it was uncomfortable for me, well, what do y'all think? What do you want to do? Where are we? While also gently pushing back when people wanted us to go run faster than we were ready to run. Right. And so, and there's a delicate dance in that, but also making sure that all decisions were made in a participatory way where it made sense, always soliciting ideas, and even the survey work was part of that work, right? Making sure that we're getting back from people, not just why they need this space or why they come to this space, but what do they want to see the space do? And then responding to that. Our entire 2019 calendar is a response to the survey. And encouraging brothers to extend themselves and model it, and treating the principles that we have as aspirational. So it's not the expectation that you're going to be this aggressive social justice warrior person coming in the door. That we all have our biases, we all have our stuff, we all fall short. Even me, myself, as somebody who's been doing this work for a long time, I always say, okay, the street side, the south side of Chicago, Michael's coming out, right? Versus the progressive, educated, was molded to not do that thing, Michael. And, and my brothers have permission to check me on that. My brothers have permission to say, Michael, you're getting snarky, because that's one of my things. So, it's about that, right? Creating an understanding that we're all works in progress, and that when we hold each other accountable, is not we're holding each other accountable from a hierarchical space. We're not saying that you have to be on your knees for me to feel tall. We're saying that we all want to make sure we're tall together. How can we better do that with each other? Practice active listening. Respect their agency. Offer I statements when you're making recommendations. And be responsible and accountable to your transgressions. And that means your, leadership on down. Everybody has to be accountable to the energy they bring in a room. And we actually say that. We've had a couple of experiences we learned early on where we've had people not be able to hold their liquor because our space is not an alcohol-free space, and like be nasty and change the energy in the room. And so we learned really quickly that we have to be protective of the space. We have to meet people where they are, but that doesn't mean that you can ruin the environment for everybody else, right? And so there have been a couple of occasions where we've had to lovingly carry brothers to the side and say, not today, and let's talk about when you can come back, right? And let's work through it. We want you back. Because we don't, one thing Charles Stevens has taught me and it's not something I actually, and I always say this because it's not something I practiced before Charles Stevens taught me this, is that we don't throw Black gay men away. And so how can we practice not throwing Black gay men away, but also being protective of the environment and the spaces that we have? And a lot of that I was lucky enough to get from my youth work, because we didn't do that with young people. All right, slide. So what does any of that have to do with community building or power? Go ahead, slide. We just go ahead and move forward. Everything is relationship. So everything that I've said are really the fundamentals of having good relationship, are really the fundamentals of having good communication, is really about how do you create sanctuary? How do you create sanctuary for yourself? How do you create sanctuary for your partners? How do you create sanctuary for other people? Is all about relationship and being honest about how you're broaching yourself and the brothers. And, these are some members. This actually is not stock photography. These are some of the brothers who are part of BBB. Actually, all of the images you're seeing tonight are from BBB. So it's relationship, and which means that you have to treat it that way. And I oftentimes refer to BBB as I would a child. So our first year we were in our infancy. This year we're our toddler years. And some of that is to put in the image of something that still needs to be protected, something that's still wobbly, something that still is, not going to always get it right, and it's still learning and growing and evolving. Slide. So this is what a potluck looks like in my living room. There's a piece that I wrote. Feel free to go and access it. It's on the Counter Narrative blog, the Reckoning blog for CMP, called The Magic of Living Room and Basements. And I talk about the fact that BBB is following a tradition that has already been established by Black feminists, by a roving Black gay men's card party in Philly that was for brothers kind of over 30 that ended up building community, host house to house for people who didn't want to participate in the club scene, through artist collectives. And the literary salons of the Harlem Renaissance, to book clubs that you have access to today. All of these are kind of organizing models of using the space you have. It's not always about going to rent an office or rent a hall. I have upwards of 45 brothers sometimes in my home in a potluck. The benefit of a potluck is that you have some cost sharing, though I do still spend a pretty penny, which is why we are so grateful for the coin we get from Counter Narrative Project. It reduces our search for space, and it promotes consistency. We don't, I know I can make sure my home is going to be right for it. The original thought was not to always have it at my home. The original thought was to have it be a roving party. But the reality is that Detroit is an economically depressed space. Not everybody has space that I have. I'm in a single family home by myself. And so I'm able to do that. I also have furniture that is all weight tested, right? Every single piece of furniture in my home was chosen and looked and reviewed for what their capacity for weight is, so that brothers wouldn't have that embarrassing moment that they a lot of times have in the other space parts of their lives where they sit on a piece of furniture and it breaks, or bends or it cracks, and want to avoid that moment for brothers. So, which also meant some financial investment on my part, but that was something I was willing to take on regardless because I'm a big boy. Now, what our colleagues, so now BBB in its second year has chapters in other cities, 3 other cities other than Detroit, Cincinnati being the furthest along. And Cincinnati didn't do potlucks first. They actually spent several months doing, almost a year now, doing bar night first. And the benefit of that is they didn't have to think about plates and cups and all of that, those kind of things. People could just drop in at the bar and leave when they were done. The downside is because it wasn't a Black gay bar and it wasn't a bar that they owned, they eventually, as they began to grow in size and tip the scale of the racial scale of the space, ended up having racist moments and they ended up having to find someplace else to be in order to protect the brothers in that space. So that's something that, and so they've since come to see how we do the potluck to figure out what the model looks like, and so they can start the potluck this spring. So that's something that they're looking at. In the meantime, they've moved to an artist space on a different night, and where there has a long history of being LGBTQ friendly and people of color friendly, so they're having those issues. So those are some of the things that you have to think about if you decide to organize around a bar. The other part, I mean, for Black Bear Brotherhood, we're not for everybody. We do have alcohol in the space. You know, some brothers do eat edibles, you know. So, you know, we're not like no cocaine, no heroin, no meth. None of those things. Are very clear about that. But if you're somebody who's dealing with sobriety issues, you know, Black Bear Brotherhood might be a triggering space. And we also have other spaces in our city for brothers who are dealing with that. We have a Dodie Detroit who we collaborate with also. So it's not like there's nothing if you can't access us. Next slide. So this is a picture of Black Bear Brotherhood Cincinnati. So this is what they look like in their kind of bar night out. And this is kind of the praxis of it. So the practice and the knowledge put together. So, you know, we identify popular opinion leaders. I'm not a Detroit native. I've only lived here just under 5 years, come October to be 5 years. So I had to identify and find people who already had relationships and tentacles, you know, outside of me. I had a handful of folks that I was in relationship with, particularly as my formal role as Deputy Director of Equality Michigan. So people kind of knew me, but they also didn't know me. They kind of knew me as a figure of a political thing. So I had to rely on the relationships that other people had and recruit them into this idea, and encourage them to invite their tribe. Say, hey, invite your friends. The first ever potluck was a barbecue. And I was like, I'm going to cover the barbecue. Just have your people come. And people, like 12 folks came. We had a great time. And before I knew it, we were at 25 folks, and then we were at 35 folks. So that's how that went down. Host fun, social, low obligation event. We did not do anything super serious beyond the topics and the conversations that naturally, organically came out of the room for a whole first year. We introduced this year the self-care salon specifically for brothers who were looking to do personal development, right? Like, so people who were a little bit more serious-minded, wanted something more out of the space. One of the things I learned from running a youth center is meeting people where they are means that you have the range on the table, on the menu for people. So if the person just wants to come in and check and see if there's a date, and that's their version of building and being part of the community, okay, they can come in and see about seeing a date. That they know they come and it's going to be there for them. To the person who is like, yo, I want to be part of your get out the vote effort. I want to be part of this community thing y'all doing on meth. So there's a point of entry across our menu for people who want to be involved in different levels. And we always make sure, this is something I learned from watching reality TV shows. Whatever made you famous, you stick with that. So we still make sure our potluck is fun, social, a low obligation event. And then we offer other things on top of that. But the potluck is our base, and it's once a month. And we make sure that people understand, because we had a couple of people who, even though we would tell people you could just bring a bag of ice or a bag of chips, you don't have to bring a plate or a platter of wings or a bottle of Grey Goose, because that was kind of the thinking. We do have brothers who bring that every time. And we have people who do just bring a bag of ice or some juice. There were still brothers who even the bag of ice wasn't affordable, and so they wouldn't come. And so we finally had to communicate to them, your presence is more important than your offering. We want your offering. It's great. It's a potluck. But if you got 45 people, if 10 people don't bring something and 30 people do, we got more. We got abundance. I'm telling people to take stuff home, right? Because I don't want all that in my house. So, so making sure that people understand that they're valuable. And then just kind of repeat, you capture the data. From the very beginning, we've been capturing contact information for eBlast. We're going to go deeper. You got to get people used to giving you their information. You can't start asking them a whole bunch of in-depth survey work and they don't know you, don't have a relationship with you. We waited up to 2 years before we're going to now start getting people's health and their finances. But it's not something you can start off with. Slow growth. This is something that I strongly recommend. Wait for consistent signs of community investment. Are people showing up 3 and 4 times in a row? Are people like, if you cancel it, are they sending, wait, I was planning on coming, I was disappointed. Is this something that people are showing, not just talking, showing in their actions they're committed to? And then you can add on. But wait till you start seeing those signs of investments before you add on. Early on, we developed mission, values, principles. We talked about that. We did a democratic practice for elections. We elected officers. We continue to encourage ownership. Slide. So these are kind of all the things that we offer, and these are some of the promotional tools that we've done around those events. So we do quarterly community forums, and we partner with the other social groups in town. The last one we did on crystal meth and sex work was a 4-part partnership. So we had the Ruth Ellis Center, which focuses on kids. We had Adoti, which is an older, more sober group. We had Onyx, which is the kink and leather kids. And then we had ourselves. And it was the first time in Detroit's history, and LGBT Detroit, which is our Black LGBT organization, it was the first time all 5 of those entities had collaborated on a single event. So we're really proud of that. We also make sure we send out a press release. We make sure we call the local gay media. We want to make sure we're showing up and building a reputation for positive things. People are constantly saying what they don't see people do. Oh, I don't know that exists. I don't know, so to the extent that you can create earned media opportunities, these community forums are a great way to do that. Our potluck isn't really that, though the very first interview I did, I got to talk about those things too. Consistently invite these people to partner with you. It helps reduce your costs. The first event we paid for ourselves and just invited the partners to be part of. After that, we were asking for people to, can you do $100? Can you do $200 to be part of this, to help cut costs for us, but also to make sure that their buy-in was more significant. Everybody's much more involved when they have skin in the game, even if it's just $100 or $200. And laying the foundation for greater impact. So all of this for us is about how can we grow and be better and do more in the future. We've already talked about the get out the vote, and what they do in Cincinnati is also like toy drives and food drive work, and addressing issues that are underlining both the personal and the collective. So thinking beyond HIV, but also still including HIV. Our brothers, unfortunately, because of the way HIV has impacted our work and our community, it's kind of like the only way, again, that people engage us. And so we did not do anything around HIV for the first 1.5 years on purpose, just so people could get a refresh. And now our next event is going to be our first event around CRIM and HIV criminalization and PrEP. Addressing a whole person. So even though we're focused and centering around brothers of size, we are always saying we are more than that. We are more than our sexuality. We are more than our size, but we're those things too. So to the extent that we honor the fact that we have so many anime and gamers among us, we honor that we have so many like theater nerds among us. We honor the fact that we have, our group is very blue collar. I would say about half work in security or factories or plants. So, you have to make sure that you're, again, meeting people where they are and addressing the whole person. Those whole person's needs are well beyond their sexuality and well beyond their size. We also are trying to address peer-to-peer trauma through the self-care salon. Our next step is to try to get brothers trained to be able to offer one another basic counseling techniques, because we have a deficit here in Detroit of mental health and behavioral health professionals who are culturally competent for Black LGBTQ folk. We have one Black lesbian. She's overwhelmed. She started referring out. She can't take another client. We have one Black trans man. He can't even return calls at this point. He's so booked. So there's a real lack. In the meantime, we're seeing depression, anxiety. We're seeing all kind of personality disorders, all over the place. And so we can't wait on other people to help take care of the mental health of our community. And so we're not trying to diagnose folks. We're trying to make sure we're some kind of paraprofessional, but we are trying to make sure that brothers can do some basic things like attending and active listening and motivational interviewing and learning how to de-escalate situations and de-escalate episodes, because we, more often than not, is going to be another brother in that space that's going to see that person when they're having a moment or be reached out to when that brother's having a moment, and they need the tools to know how to handle it. Slide. So, those are kind of the things. We have an expansion of chapters. We are DC and Seattle are supposed to launch this spring. Somebody from Chicago has reached out to me recently. So we're going to continue this slow growth and help this model spread to other cities. We launched our Instagram in January. We're almost at 1,000 Instagram followers already. We launched our Facebook page a while ago. What's interesting, our Facebook, everybody complains about this Facebook page, doesn't really get anywhere near the traction of our Instagram. And we have a Facebook working, a group, so that brothers who are interested in being part of that can access the space. So that's our model. I mean, there's, obviously a little bit more to the stuff, and, I can share an information packet with more about who BBB is and what we do. I have a frequently asked questions sheet that I can also share for those who may be interested. And that's it. Any questions?
Michael, thank you so much and for that. And I do want to, it is 8:17 Eastern. I do want to honor people if they have questions though. So if there's anyone who has a question for Michael or Monte, if we could get that question now, that would be amazing. Thank you. Going once, going twice. Okay. Well, you know what? I am going to take this opportunity to thank Monte J. Wolfe and L. Michael Gipson for being part of tonight's Mobilize or a Black Gay Manual training. This training will be available to you by video, and we will make sure that you have access to the slides as well. So it will be on YouTube. So we'll make sure that we link you to it and make sure that you do have the links that you can download presentations. I want to thank y'all for your amazing work. I get a chance to work with these brothers like every day. So I see what they do and I see what they do and how they do it. And y'all inspire me. So thank y'all for doing this tonight and sharing these things with the world, because if you're looking to build something, these are two folks that do that on a regular basis. So thank you all so much for attending tonight's webinar, and we will follow up with everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you, everybody.